Hi everyone, Jim Nguyen here with iSmart Realty. In this specific episode here, I'm going to cover working with contractors. And I've been doing this for 19 years, so I'm accumulating all of the questions and concerns that buyers and sellers have. And the number one thing that you're going to have done to your house is work. So whether you purchase the property, you're going to have work done afterwards, or you are repairing the property or upgrading the property or doing the updates so that you can sell the property, obviously you have to work with a contractor. So with this particular episode here, we're going to cover working with contractors. It's really a difficult thing to work with contractors if you don't have the proper things in place. So I'm going to share with you guys the contract that I use. Obviously, I am not an attorney, so if you feel the need to have an attorney evaluate a document or any document that you create, but typically if the contractor and you agree on a document, you guys sign off on it, it's going to be binding. So let's go ahead and dive into the contract. All right, guys, so here's the document here that I used. I had painting done, interior painting throughout the whole house. So basically, I obviously had it highlighted here, agreement for painting services, parties that's involved. I'm going to blur some of this stuff out to protect the contractor just not having his information everywhere. But obviously, you're going to want to have the parties involved, spell out your name, property that is being worked on, their name, their company name, and also their address. That way, it's you have full information on all parties. The work that's going to be done here, you want to state exactly, and spelled everything out because this is going to cover you on work that's being done. So if the painter is agreeing to do interior paint, you want to specify exactly what he's going to do. You want to specify, even down to the baseboards, down to any texturing that you are wanting him to do. If you're doing knockdown, if there's any orange peel, if there's any ceiling work that's actually being done, if there's any trim work that's being done, you want to be able to disclose all of that on there. If you have to break them down, as you can see right here, I broke them down specifically in each area that what's going to be done, what type, and what type of paint. So I broke it down to the exact color, and I gave them the exact number. I believe with this particular paint, I use Sherwin-Williams paint, and I gave them exactly everything down to the trim colors that would be used. If you're having the garage included, you want to be able to include that in there as well. Then you go down to the total cost. So the total cost that you're going to exactly pay the contractor, you have that in here, and the time for the performance. So you want to always give contractors a deadline. In this particular job, it was you always want to include that. And the reason why you want to include that is, you want to hold them to a certain time frame. So typically with contractors, a lot of times they tend to drag their feet. I mean, a lot of times they're working on multiple jobs, right? So they try to fit you in. So a job this big, it actually requires a lot of time. So whether it's small or big, give them a deadline. If they have a deadline, they have to commit to that time frame. Then you can also put in there, if they don't commit and complete that job in that time frame that you guys agreed upon, then you will be able to deduct that cost from them. So for example, I put in here that if they do not complete the job with the certain time frame, then we would start deducting $100 per day. In this case, what ended up happening was they ended up having some issues, and they could not complete the job in time. So I understand, being in the industry, I understand that you run into a lot of issues, you're juggling a lot of things. So at a minimum, at least they came and they approached me and saying, hey, look, I want to let you know up front, we ran into some issues. and you know, can we work on this? And they, you know, we then amended another deadline. And that, if you don't have something like that in place, it's really going to give them the ability to keep on dragging their feet out, especially when it's a big job. So make sure you have something like that in place. It doesn't have to be exact like I have, but something in that fact. Supplies and tools. Disclose on here and specify exactly what is involved. And this really falls under the contractor. If they're actually doing the work and they're actually supplying the paint, supplying all the materials, you want to have everything specified in here. The reason for being is they could be using any type of products that you guys don't agree upon, and if you specify everything, it's just going to help you guys out having you know, clarity on what you guys agreed upon. So if anything comes up, everything's documented. So I highly suggest for you to have something like that onto your contract. So make sure that you have everything that is going to be used. Specify the colors. If you're doing replacement of any kind, specify, you know, the SKU numbers, where the product might be purchased at. So that way they're not, you know, buying something from somewhere else and the quality of that product is not up to par from what you're expecting. The schedule of payments. So typically this is where I see a lot of folks go wrong in. They just, you know, it's just not the safest way to do it. How I like to prefer to pay is I like to pay in tiers. The reason why I want to pay in tiers is I want to make sure the work is done. I can evaluate the work and then I pay them for the work that has been completed. A lot of times, you know, I've done it many times. Trust me, you know, I've paid up front before, so learn from my mistakes. Don't do that. Pay in tiers. So once they complete every section, you then will compensate them for that area. So if there's an agreed amount where they finish 25, 40%, depending on how big that job is, you can pay in increments. So that's what I highly suggest for you to do, especially when it's a big job. If you're working with a general contractor or what have you, you know, you definitely break it up. But if you're working specifically with that actual contractor that's actually doing that work, a lot of times my rule of thumb is if they can afford to put out money to buy all the products that the materials that need to be done, then you know, that's kind of my red flag, that if they can't, then you know, I have to be a little bit more careful. Obviously if they come recommended, then you won't have to be as careful. But if you're hiring somebody and they don't have the funds to basically buy the material, be wary, because a lot of these guys, that if they're really taking their job serious, they'll have that cushion there to be able to pay for the materials. So that's just a rule of thumb just to look out for when you're hiring somebody. So once again, break them down in tiers, and then that way you won't have to be worried about, you know, the guy ran on me and, you know, he ran off with my money. Figure out what those tiers would be, and then you guys can then work around that. The dispute and resolution, obviously, you know, we want to be fair. I want to be fair with my guys in the event that, you know, if they don't complete the job in a timely manner. I have, you know, just giving them certain amount of days for them to make it right. And if they don't make it right, then obviously we have the option to terminate. So if they, for example, like you see here, if they show up for 2 consecutive days, making any progress, then I have the option to terminate the contract and then go work with somebody else. Always have something like that in here. That it really protects you. The reason why is, you know, if you have a great contractor, it's wonderful. But what you're preparing for is all the ones that aren't that great. And trust me, there's a lot out there. So when you have something like this in here, it really lets them be aware of, hey, you know, you're not just somebody that's messing around. You want to get the job done. You want to make sure that they do the job right. And there's repercussion if they don't. So everything's fully disclosed. Everything's on here. And there's just no confusion. So, you know, worst case, you would have to go to court, but obviously with these things built in here, that's what you are trying to avoid, because that's not a fun process. But this is pretty much it. This is the document that I've used. You can modify this and, you know, really just change the scope of the work on exactly what you would be working on. And then just once again, make sure you have everything on there as far as material. That's one of the key
last thing that we're going to cover is warranty. So you want to make sure that they're going to warrant their work. So always have in there that they're going to warrant their work. So when it comes to paint, so if you apply paint or texture, if you rush it, if you do the job too quick, if they are repairing cracks, or if you had holes and they're actually repairing part of the sheetrock and then patching it up and then texturing it, if they rush it, or if they, it could be times where they have too much water that's in the texture when they're spraying it, these things can crack. And it can also, you know, if they over texture it, things won't look right. And it can, when I say over textures, they put too much mud on there. So what ends up happening is it ends up drying up and then it ends up cracking. It may not happen immediately. Typically, you're going to want them to wait and let that texture dry before they paint it. But once again, it's something that you have to know. Sometimes you're not aware of that, and you just think they're going to do the proper job. So in your warranty, you want to include these things, that if the workmanship is bad, then you need to come back out and they need to make those repairs at no cost to you. So make sure you include these warranties in there, whatever it is that you're doing. And a lot of it's going to be pertaining towards bad workmanship. So obviously, if you buy paint and, you know, it's a quality paint and that, you know, paint itself goes bad in some way, somehow, just because you had a bad batch or whatever the case is, that, you know, it started to fade, and you know it's not from workmanship, then obviously that's, you know, for me, I wouldn't include that as bad workmanship. Bad workmanship's just the work was not done properly. But that's the last thing that typically you would cover. Once again, Jim here with iSmart Realty. Have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, and look out for the future videos that I will be releasing. Take care. Bye-bye.